Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We do apologize for the slight delay, but we are officially ready to commence. We'd like to recognize the protocol, especially our two invited guests who will be gracing us with the engagement this evening, that is on the 25th Dr. THEO GURIRAB Lectures Series. Ladies and gentlemen, if I can perhaps ask us to remain standing while we then start, that is with the Namibia as well as the AU anthems.
Namibia, land of the brave freedom fight, we have won. Glory to their bravery, whose blood waters our freedom. We give our love and loyalty. Together in unity, contrasting beautiful Namibia, Namibia, our country, beloved land of savannas, hold high the banner of liberty. Namibia, our country, Namibia, motherland, we love thee. Let us all unite and celebrate together the victories won for our liberation. Let us dedicate ourselves to rise together to defend our liberty and unity. Oh, sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky, let us make Africa the tree of life.
Thank you very much. We may be seated. Honorable Selma Ashipala Musavi, Minister of International Relations and Trade, His Excellency Wamkele Mene, Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, Her Excellency Hopelong Porora, who is a UN Resident Coordinator to Namibia, Honorable Jeneli Matundu, Deputy Minister of International Relations and Trade, Ms. Joan Guriras, widow of the late Dr. THEO GURIRAB, members of Parliament, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Profita Kachavivi, former Speaker of the National Assembly and Ambassador of Namibia to the European Union, Dr. Panduleni Itula, who is the President of the Independent Patriots for Change, the official opposition in Namibia, Your Worship, Councillor Zacharias Unona, Mayor of the City of Windhoek, former members of NAFA, who are the members from Namibian Association of Former Ambassadors, distinguished invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Namibians and also fellow Africans as we are celebrating Africa Day today, and also our viewers who are tuned in on that's on NBC One and on Facebook. A very good evening and thank you so much for making time to join us on this 25th series of the Dr. THEO GURIRAB Lecture Series. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Lot Ndamanamata. I'll be directing this short program that we have here at the Windhoek Country Club and Resort. The theme that is guiding our discussion tonight is can intra-African trade enhance Namibia's economy? We know of the challenges that we face, and today we also had Africa Day celebrating 63 years since the founding of the OAU, where we are looking towards of a more integrated Africa that is thriving economically and for us to thrive. And we know the agenda of the current government is about youth, unemployment, and so many other matters. Now, in terms of our program, we have a very short program that you have there in front of you. The I would like to invite, that is the Minister, that is Honorable Selma Ashpala Musavi, who is the Minister of International Relations and Trade, to deliver short remarks and to also set the tone for our discussion tonight. Honorable Minister, the podium is yours. Please, let's give a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Lord. And happy Africa Day. Thank you to our Director of Ceremonies who have set the protocol so ably. However, let me take a moment to recognize everybody. Thank you very much for coming. I know we were competing with a long weekend, and we are also live streaming. So I'm very delighted that you have made the time to attend this lecture. I see a lot of young people. Thank you for taking an interest in Africa's economic integration, and I'm sure some of you are also studying. So thank you very much. Let me recognize the honorable ministers and deputy ministers, members of parliament. I see here our members of the diplomatic corps, distinguished guests. As an African, age is very important, so I need to recognize Prof. Kachavivi. Thank you very much for coming. Madam Joan GURIRAB, it's always a pleasure to have you. My friend Professor Tucker from the Carnegie Mellon University in the US, who is the special guest of the Ministry of International Relations and Trade, Mr. Ichula, the President of IPC. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Please, if I have not mentioned you, it's because the protocol was set. And then, of course, our guest of honor, my good friend, my brother, His Excellency Wamkele Mene, whom I've served with in Ghana when I was Namibia's High Commissioner to Accra. It's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome back home. Having been part of the conception of the Dr. THEO GURIRAB lecture series, I am delighted to be here this evening as we convene the 25th lecture. The lecture series was established with the objective of encouraging the Namibians to take an active interest in matters relating to international relations, to take an active interest in our foreign policy, in factors that leads to its formulation as well as implementation. And over the years, the platform has provided an important space for dialogue and engagement on issues that shape Namibia's position within Africa, the sub-region, the continent, the global south, and the international community. This evening, as we have been informed by the Director of Ceremonies, the lecture is being held under the theme, Can Intra-African Trade Enhance Namibia's Economy? In other words, can Africa's economic integration, can our intra-African trade add value to growth at home? This theme comes at a critical time as Africa continues to advance the implementation of AU Agenda 2063 and its flagship projects, particularly the African Continental Free Trade Area. As a ministry, we have hosted numerous lectures and engagements focusing on how the AFCFTA can benefit Namibia. In fact, we had workshopped the AFCFTA in all our 14 regions, with particular emphasis on key economic regions and sectors across our country. So these discussions have consistently highlighted the importance of industrialization, value addition, market access, youth and women participation in trade, infrastructure development, and regional connectivity in ensuring that Namibia fully benefits from the opportunities presented by the AFCFTA. I am therefore deeply honored by the presence and participation of His Excellency Wamkele Mene, the Secretary General of the AFCFTA, whose leadership of the Secretariat continues to guide and shape the continent's trade integration agenda. Your Excellency, your participation in this lecture affords us valuable opportunity to benefit from your insight and perspectives on intra-African trade and the implementation process of the AFCFTA. Your contribution will undoubtedly enrich our discussions and provide meaningful perspectives on regional economic integration and trade development across the African continent. For Namibia, we have continued to make steady progress in the implementation of the AFCFTA. And I would like to just provide a brief update on the status of Namibia's implementation efforts. We signed the AFCFTA on July 2018, deposited our instruments for ratification in 2019. We have started trading under the AFCFTA rules in 2025. We are proud to make our contribution on the integration of the continent economically. As part of our national implementation efforts, we have undertaken a number of institutional and policy measures aimed at positioning our country to benefit from the agreement. The AFCFTA has been integrated into our national development agenda and is reflected in key policy frameworks, including the 6th National Development Plan, as well as the SWAPO Party Election Manifesto. The benefits of Namibia's participation in AFCFTA are substantial, and I believe the Secretary General will talk to that. Let me also add that with regard to our participation in AFCFTA, this is an agreement that provides Namibia with access to a continental market. Secondly, the AFCFTA supports industrialization and value addition. Thirdly, it has the potential to reduce Africa's dependence on external markets. For Namibia specifically, the AFCFTA presents an opportunity to position itself strategically as a trade and logistic hub for the region. Namibia therefore reaffirms its commitment to the full and effective implementation of the AFCFTA and to working together with fellow African countries to ensure that the agreement delivers tangible benefits for the people of our continent. As we commemorate this milestone, the 25th session of Dr. THEO Ben GURIRAB Lecture Series, let us continue to honor the legacy of Dr. THEO Ben GURIRAB by fostering informed dialogue on issues that matter to our nation, our region, and our continent. This morning, we had a very successful event co-organized with the African Diplomatic Corps, where we were discussing about the achievement of the continent since the formation of the Organization of the African Unity, now the African Union, where we pay tribute to the founders of the African Union, where we recognized that we still have work to do in terms of economic emancipation. This is a continuation of what we started earlier this morning, as we now want to dwell into the programs that will lead our continent to economic emancipation. And we could not have a better person, a son of the African soil, to lead us into this discussion than the Secretary General himself of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, His Excellency Wamkele Mene, who I now have the distinct pleasure of inviting to the podium to address us. Secretary General, the podium is yours. Let's welcome him.
Thank you very much, Comrade Minister. Honorable Comrade Minister Selma Ashipala Musyavi, Honorable Deputy Minister Matundu, Executive Director Ngipondoka Rubiata, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, High Commissioners, the family of Dr. THEO Ben GURIRAB, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends, I am very happy to be here. And I want to start by publicly appreciating the support that Namibia gave me in my first election in 2020. Namibia was one of the strongest supporters in my election. Namibia continued to support me for my re-election from when we started together in 2020. In that election, I had hair, my beard was not gray, and we have been on this journey together with Namibia, and I very much appreciate the support. Of course, Her Excellency Comrade President was the Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, and now we continue the journey. It is really an honor to be invited to speak today to honor and remember the contribution of a patriot, a freedom fighter, and a revolutionary. I join this distinguished group of speakers who have preceded me in celebrating the life and legacy of this giant of the liberation struggle of Namibia. Once again, I express my deep appreciation for this opportunity, and I commend the efforts of Comrade Minister, the Deputy Minister, and the entire ministry for continuing to preserve and carry forward the legacy of Dr. GURIRAB and his vision. Of course, today we will interrogate, we will examine the path that Namibia has chosen to take in terms of accelerating inclusive economic growth, integrating the economy into the regional and the continental economy. And I congratulate you, Minister, and your team for your bravery, because when you invite an outsider, it means that you have to have a degree of bravery and confidence that whatever the outsider delivers, that you will take it in a constructive manner, and more importantly, in a comradely manner. And so I congratulate you for the willingness at self-critiquing as a country. It's not an easy task for me because Namibia is my home. And so there is a degree of bias that I have had to separate as we prepared for this important engagement. This is a significant coincidence. We celebrate this lecture on the day that we're celebrating the anniversary and the establishment of the Organization of African Unity, which emerged from Africa's collective struggle for unity, liberation, solidarity, and the self-determination of African peoples. With the defeat of apartheid here in Namibia and the defeat of apartheid in South Africa, I would argue that the founding mothers and the founding fathers of the Organization of African Unity, to an extent, did achieve the objective of total and complete liberation of our continent in a political sense. However, what we must, as Africans, admit is that what has evaded us since May 1963 is economic sovereignty. It is the liberation in an economic sense of our continent. This is a task that remains incomplete. And this lack of economic sovereignty is exemplified by a number of things. The over-reliance of exports on commodities that are unprocessed in Africa, exported to other parts of the world, imported as finished products. This is a demonstration that the task is incomplete. Importing, for example, in the area of pharmaceuticals, $20 billion in the year 2019, $20 billion worth of pharmaceutical products that we import for our own public health as a continent. And so therefore, the central question that I believe must occupy our minds in a revolutionary sense is how do we, in this context of a changed site of struggle, a changed environment of struggle, how do we complete this liberation of our continent in an economic sense? So this year's commemoration takes place at a moment of very significant global economic and geopolitical turmoil. Rising geopolitical tensions, rising trade and investment protectionism, rising national industrial protectionism, the uncertainty around AGOA. Is it here today? Is it gone tomorrow? And the fragmentation of global supply chains that place our continent in a materially negative situation in relation to accessing global markets. But I believe that amidst all of these challenges, all of these materially adverse conditions of the global economy, the unjust wars that are taking place, our continent has a very unique opportunity to turn this crisis into benefits. We have vast natural resources. We have a youthful population which must be leveraged as a dividend for the benefit of our continent. Of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world last year, 6 were in Africa. Our GDP per capita continues to grow. The African Development Bank estimates that over the next year or two, the continent of Africa will continue to grow at about 4.5% per annum. Our continent is the second most competitive investment destination in the world. The first being the Far East. And so all of these attributes, when you consider them together, they position our continent, the regions of our continent, in a very positive and competitive, potentially competitive context. Countries and regions around the world are placing greater emphasis on reliance through stronger regional integration, diversified markets, and of course, regional value chains that enable regions to be competitive and to be less reliant on global supply chains that are vulnerable in times of geopolitical tensions. It is therefore both timely and fitting that we reflect on this question that Comrade Minister raised. Can intra-Africa trade enhance Namibia's economy? And this question, by the way, speaks directly to what many of Africa's founding leaders, including Dr. GURIRAB, dedicated their lives to addressing: sovereignty, dignity, self-determination, and a more integrated economy in Africa. Today, intra-Africa trade accounts for only about 18%. When you compare that with intra-regional trade in Europe, intra-European trade is at 70%. Intra-trade in Asia is at 60%. Intra-trade in North America is at 35%. And so clearly our continent is on the lower end of these comparisons, and that is why the AFCFTA exists. Expanding intra-Africa trade, therefore, must be the immediate challenge that our continent confronts to enable us to accelerate industrial development and economic integration. The African Union, as you know, adopted Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. And embedded in Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, are flagship projects: infrastructure, trade and integration, building transport and logistics systems that will function optimally to enable the continent to leverage on her vast resources. And then, of course, the AFCFTA is one of the flagship projects of Agenda 2063. With the operationalization of the AFCFTA, led by our heads of states, the Assembly of Heads of States and Government, we have demonstrated that actually the AFCFTA is no longer an ambition. It is no longer just an ideal. It is becoming a reality. It is not just a diplomatic exercise. It is steadily becoming a commercially viable market. And in a moment, I will set out examples of this commercial viability of the AFCFTA. As we speak today, 50 members of the African Union have ratified the AFCFTA, the fastest instrument to be ratified in the history, certainly the history of the African Union, but also in the history of the Organization of African Unity. It is the fastest instrument to be ratified. And this, of course, demonstrates political will. It demonstrates ambition. And certainly in a legal sense, ratification demonstrates legal commitment to eliminate, reduce barriers to intra-Africa trade. We have also concluded all of the protocols that the Assembly of Heads of States directed that we conclude, establishing a very strong legal foundation for an integrated market in Africa as we adhere in terms of our continental integration, as we adhere to the linear model of integration that our leaders agreed to in the Abuja Treaty. We are on track. We have also agreed, substantially agreed, on rules of origin, which is very important for our industrial development as a continent, to foster industrialization in Africa. We also have started on the path of tariff elimination, and our heads of states have directed that by the year 2030, Africa must trade at zero duty or zero tariffs on all products. And the ministers of trade have started implementing this directive of the heads of states. Commercially meaningful trade is taking place. As Comrade Minister mentioned, Namibia was one of the first countries to participate in the Guided Trade Initiative, which was launched in October 2022. We also have witnessed a very significant and sharp increase in what we refer to as certificates of origin, which is the evidence that trade is actually happening. And last year, there were 8,500 certificates of origin that were issued, demonstrating confidence by our economic operators that indeed this market is commercially viable. This momentum is becoming evident in the data. According to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development's Global Trade Update, estimated that global trade was at approximately $35 trillion in the year 2025, driven largely by developing countries, with Africa among the regions outperforming the global average, supported by increasing intra-Africa trade. This trajectory is set to continue. This year, Afreximbank projects that intra-Africa trade will increase by 10% to approximately $230 billion United States dollars. What is remarkable and significant is that this share of intra-Africa trade, we're witnessing an increase in trade in manufactured goods and trade in agro-processed goods, which is a very, very important and welcome shift away from Africa's dependence on primary commodities toward a more diversified, value-adding economy for our continent. And so, against this backdrop, the proposition I want to advance today is this: that intra-Africa trade, driven by the AFCFTA, can significantly enhance Namibia's ambition for structural economic transformation. And this is the case for many, many countries in Africa. However, realizing this potential will depend on our continent and Namibia's ability to strengthen industrial development, invest in value addition, in infrastructure, productive investment, and regional integration, connection, supply chains. In many respects, this Namibia's development trajectory reflects both the opportunities and structural constraints that confront many, many African countries in Africa. Namibia is already demonstrating important signs of deeper integration, not only in SACU, of course, and not only in SADC, but integration into the rest of Africa's economy outside of SADC and SACU. Namibia ratified the AfCFTA in 2019, gazetted the tariff offer in December 2024, and in June 2025 made the very first shipment from Namibia to Nigeria. And recent trade data indicates that Africa's share of Namibia's exports rose significantly following the operationalization of the AfCFTA. This means that in the implementation of the AfCFTA at a domestic level, the results are beginning to show. Africa's share of Namibia's exports are increasing. Between the year 2016 and 2020, Africa accounted for roughly 32 to 40% of Namibia's total exports. By the year 2023, the share of Namibia's exports destined for the African continent increased to over 55% before moderating slightly in the year 2024. This demonstrates the growing importance of African markets to Namibia's export market diversification strategy. It underscores that the government is on the right track to focus on market diversification, pivoting onto the African continent. And from our point of view as a secretariat, Namibia's economic structure reveals both opportunities and vulnerabilities. And again, not dissimilar from many countries in Africa. Export growth continues to be driven largely by commodities, including gold, diamonds, fisheries products, and petroleum-related exports. Of course, these sectors are very, very important generators of revenue and foreign exchange. But they also expose the economy to commodity price volatility and limit broader industrial transformation if not properly managed in a macroeconomic sense. This challenge extends across our continent, where many economies continue to export raw primary commodities that are unprocessed while importing higher value-added manufactured goods. I mentioned the example of pharmaceutical products, $20 billion in the year 2019. In the coffee industry, $100 billion global industry, Africa exports $6 billion worth of unprocessed coffee, losing in the value chain investment and return on investment that could be here on our continent. And so exporting $20 billion worth of pharmaceutical products means, in an economic sense and in a real sense, $20 billion worth of jobs exported, $20 billion worth of competitiveness forgone. And so we must accelerate implementation of the AfCFTA and the industrial structural transformation that all of us desire to see. As you know, economic growth is not the same as economic transformation. Growth means an expanded economy. Transformation requires the fundamental restructuring of an economy, shifting away from extraction and export of raw materials toward manufacturing, processing, productive investment, and stronger linkages will arise between manufacturing capacity and job creation as a result. This is exactly why intra-Africa trade matters. We observe the global economy and the headwinds, the expiry of AGOA, the limited market access into the European Union, the global supply chains that, when they are fractured, benefit only one part of the world. This is exactly why, as Africans, we must accelerate the establishment of a domestic market that is capable of addressing the self-sufficiency needs of our continent, whether it is in pharmaceuticals, in the auto sector, and indeed in food security. Trade within our continent differs fundamentally from many of Africa's trade relationships with external markets exactly because of this point that I made earlier, and that is the share, which is relatively higher, the share of manufactured goods and services within Africa's overall export profile. In other words, intra-Africa trade has far greater potential to support our industrial development, the establishment of regional value chains, technology transfer, and of course, employment creation. I think this factor about intra-Africa trade is what distinguishes, this attribute is what distinguishes intra-Africa trade vis-a-vis trade of an African country with a third party outside of our continent. This context presents Namibia with unprecedented opportunities. First, the AfCFTA provides the market for scaling, 1.4 billion people. Namibia's domestic market alone is relatively small to be able to sustain medium to long-term industrial development. Even, by the way, the largest economy in Africa, Nigeria, even the largest economy in the long term would not be able to sustain domestic demand without an export market. But I am pleased to read from the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics that in the year 2024, the largest export market from Nigeria, for Nigeria, is now the African continent. It is no longer China, it is no longer the European Union, it is no longer the Americas. It is now Africa's largest economy has now pivoted to focusing exclusively, almost exclusively, on demand through the AfCFTA in the African continent. And so to be able to anchor rapid, sustained economic growth, I would suggest that what is required is a very, very strong pivot to the African market. Industrialization requires larger markets, a larger market share, and more predictable markets that are underpinned by rules for trade and investment, and this is precisely what the AfCFTA presents. Second, the AfCFTA creates opportunities for diversification and value addition. Rather than focusing on exporting primary raw minerals, we now have an opportunity to participate more actively in regional value chains, in the processing of our minerals, the manufacturing of our value chains, including fisheries, agro-processing, logistics services, energy-intensive industries, and the emerging green industrial sector. All of these attributes Namibia already has. Third, Namibia possesses an important geographical and logistical advantage. The country is uniquely situated to serve as a regional trade hub, as a regional also logistics and services hub, connecting throughout the continent and the sub-region. The Walvis Bay Corridor, in particular, provides an important gateway linking Namibia to Botswana, Zambia, the DRC, and of course beyond, and other regional economies in Central Africa. As regional integration advances and deepens, logistics, transport, corridor access, trade corridor access will become even more important sources of economic diversification. The AFCFTA also creates opportunities beyond trade and beyond manufacturing. We have, as you know, an agreement whose scope is wide and comprehensive, and the ambition for liberalization is deep. The scope of the agreement extends to digital trade, investment, intellectual property rights, competition policy, and women and youth in trade. All of these different sectors and different protocols provide an opportunity to Namibia to anchor her export diversification strategy. The AFCFTA's protocol on digital trade in particular has the potential to facilitate the reduction and elimination of trade costs, improve market access by deploying digital tools, and strengthen participation of SMEs, particularly SMEs that are led by women and young people. The digitization of Africa's economy through this protocol positions our entire continent to benefit from a market that the International Finance Corporation projects that Africa's combined digital economy by the year 2035 will be at $720 billion. $720 billion is Africa's digital economy, which, in my opinion, is where, as a continent, we must focus in terms of inclusion for young people who are at the cutting edge of technological innovation. However, with all of these positive attributes, both for Namibia and our continent, challenges remain. The cost of infrastructure. The African Development Bank estimates that Africa's infrastructure deficit is $150 billion annually. This is, of course, a constraint to growth. It is a constraint to market expansion because it increases the costs for trade. Logistics, transport and logistics costs are also equally high. The trade finance gap estimated to be at $100 billion annually, excluding millions and millions of SMEs from accessing the market, excluding millions and millions of young people from accessing the market. The lack of harmonization of our customs systems, limited industrial capacity, which we talked about, all of these challenges continue to constrain accelerated growth of intra-Africa trade. But we have sought, as a secretariat within our means, we have sought to directly confront these challenges, working with our development finance partners, Afrexim Bank, AFDB, Africa 50, and others. Allow me a few minutes to cite some examples of how we have, of the trade tools that we have developed and deployed to tackle some of these challenges. First, we've established the AFCFTA Adjustment Fund in partnership with Afrexim Bank, which today, as we speak, has been capitalized by an amount of $1 billion, and it is intended to support countries, governments, plus the private sector in the implementation of the AFCFTA. There will be targeted interventions of this capital that are deployed, particularly where we require in-country investment in industrial development, whether it is a special economic zone or indeed acquiring new capital machinery. This is what the fund is intended for. It is not intended for the Minister of Finance to say, thank you very much, I need budget support. It has to support industry, SMEs on the ground. Second, we've established the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, again, with Afreximbank. Our continent has 42 currencies. That means that when we are trading amongst ourselves as Africans, we have to resort to a third currency, typically the United States dollar. What has the United States dollar got to do with two African countries trading? And so with Afreximbank, we have established a digital tool that enables a trader, an economic operator, to transact using local currency without having to resort to a third currency. The cost reduction we estimated as a result of this intervention to be $5 billion annually. You now will be able to transact with your counterparty in Egypt. You transact in Namibian dollars. They receive Egyptian pounds. No dollar involved. The third intervention that we have made is the Africa Trade and Distribution, the establishment of the Africa Trade and Distribution Company, which as we speak today has a capitalization and a trade facility of $750 million. Its objective under the AFCFTA and Afreximbank, its objective is to support the aggregation of products and take them to market. And this is very important for informal traders who may not have the scale to present to a continental market. It is critical for smallholder farmers who also may not have the scale to present to a continental market. They now have an opportunity through aggregation and this Africa Trade and Distribution Company to reach market. Fourth, we have established the Africa Green Industrialization Initiative, which is being led by President Ruto, to take advantage of Africa's capacity at renewables, whether it is hydro, geothermal, or indeed solar and other forms of renewable energy, where we have committed to mobilize investment as we transition as a continent to decarbonization. We must create investment opportunities as we transition to decarbonization. I'm very pleased to report to you that in September, on the 6th of September last year, under the leadership of President Ruto and the African Union, heads of states, we signed an agreement with our commercial banks as well as development finance institutions, in terms of which we have committed to unlock $100 billion worth of investment in green trade and green industrialization. Our commercial banks have stepped up and have given this commitment that over the next 5 years, this is the amount of investment that they will unlock. The AFCFTA is pleased and honored to have been identified by the Assembly of Heads of States and Government as the AU organ that must roll out this Africa Green Industrialization Initiative. And finally, we have deployed technological advancements in terms of how we trade as a continent. We have deployed an electronic tariff book, an electronic rules of origin manual, which should enable economic operators to access markets more efficiently and more cost effectively. Supported by our DFIs, our continent must increase investment in transport infrastructure, green energy, as I've just indicated, industrial parks, and productive capacity. Our development finance institutions, all of them combined, have a balance sheet of close to $150 billion. This is what is required for us as a continent to invest in our own industrial development, to invest in our own supply chain establishment. Nobody is going to deliver development for our continent. These are not my words, these are the words of President Kagame. No one owes us development. We as a continent must accelerate the development of our own continent using our own resources, and in this example I've just cited, leveraging on the balance sheet of our development finance institutions. Yes, of course, we will have global partners, but the global partners must come to support the priorities that we as a continent set forward. So these far-reaching reforms that we have to undertake in transport and logistics, in customs systems harmonization, in industrial parks, in creating connectivity, I believe that these reforms will accelerate an increase in intra-Africa trade. I mentioned earlier, a few minutes ago, the evolving global context and how this, on the face of it, this global context appears to be challenging, but it is an opportunity. Supply chain restructuring is an opportunity. Where there's a fragmentation of supply chains in Europe, in India, in China, that's an opportunity for us as a continent to establish alternative centers of driving the global economy. The over-reliance on these global supply chains exposed our weakness as a continent. But now I believe we have an opportunity. The key question, therefore, is whether our economies as a continent are able to respond sufficiently to this current global context. Are we able as a continent and also individually as countries, are we able to rapidly restructure our national development strategies, enable our regions and our countries to build a commercially viable domestic market in response to this crisis? South Africa, next door, exports vehicles to the United States under AGOA. $2.4 billion worth of exports. The United States government decides that it is ending AGOA. The result is loss of market share, job losses, and of course, a devastating impact on livelihoods. The question I put to South Africa is, where else are you going to export those vehicles? The market is here in Africa. And so for us as Africans to pivot away from some of these markets that are unpredictable, that are uncertain, that are opaque, we must establish a domestic market here on our continent. Similarly, for those that are importing, I live in Ghana. You go to a restaurant, you will see on the menu, we import our beef from Australia. And they say it with pride. We have agricultural products here on our continent. We have beef in Namibia. We have beef in Botswana. What we have to do is to accelerate the establishment of supply chains to enable Namibian beef, Botswana beef, to reach the markets that are required. Uganda produces 1 billion liters of milk per year that are literally thrown away, post-harvest losses. But there's a market here on our continent. And therefore, there's a role for our development finance institutions to finance the establishment of supply chain networks that will enable the products to reach the market. It's going to be costly and it will take time. it took about 10 to 12 years before we, as a continent, started seeing the benefits of AGOA, because that's how long it takes to establish the supply chain networks. It, of course, should not take that long. And so the point I make, given the current context, Africa must build her own domestic market. And Namibia, in her strategy for economic development, I wish to humbly propose, must prioritize the continent of Africa. I was part of the team that negotiated the economic partnership agreements with the European Union. I also negotiated AGOA. And from my own humble experience, our exports under these arrangements are negligible. And so we've got to focus on building a domestic market. I mentioned earlier that industrialization moves beyond just the manufacturing sector. It is now linked to the digital economy and digital trade, innovation, green technologies. And all of this creates new possibilities for the African continent in the area of the digital economy, particularly for young people. As I draw to a close, let me return to the significance of today, Africa Day. Our founding mothers and fathers understood that political independence remains incomplete without economic sovereignty. 63 years later, and for the first time in its post-independence history, our continent has a very unique opportunity through the AfCFTA, Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, to accelerate industrial development, value addition, economic integration, and to give meaning to Pan-Africanism. Where we fail to accelerate our own industrial development as a continent, we will be failing our founding mothers and fathers of the Organization of African Unity. And so where the achievement is only political integration, we will not be living up to their expectations. And so it is up to you and me to make sure that our own individual responsibility takes us to take this task, that it compels us to take this task forward. Pan-Africanism without industrial development, without a viable economy, is nothing but a slogan. We must move beyond sloganeering and create a viable domestic market on our continent. I therefore encourage the private sector in Namibia, economic operators, to take advantage of this market, to look beyond SACU and SADC, to leverage actually on the experience of having traded successfully within SADC and within SACU to access a market of 1.4 billion people with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. This is the value proposition to the private sector. You have an opportunity to scale and to reach new markets. This is a moment for the private sector to explore new markets, expand production, invest in value-added production, leveraging support from our development finance institutions, and to accelerate job creation for young people through entrepreneurship. Namibia has already taken very important steps towards securing her place in a competitive, connected, and prosperous continent that is rapidly transforming. The priority now is to sustain and accelerate the momentum that the government has set and to create new opportunities for market through the AfCFTA. The next phase must move Namibia forward to manufactured and value-added production that will carry Namibian enterprise into the African market. It is also the path that Dr. GURIRAB's own life exemplified, one requiring not only vision, but also execution. In honoring his legacy through this lecture series, Namibia, under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, International Relations, is not only commemorating what he achieved, but is also embracing the responsibility that still remains amongst us, the responsibility that takes account of the work that is yet to be done. The decisions that we take as a continent going forward will determine, indeed, our place in the global economy. Do we want to remain in the periphery of the global economy forever? Or do we want to build our own economic sovereignty and move beyond just saying that we have a GDP combined of 3.4 trillion United States dollars? Because GDP does not create jobs, does not put food on the table. We must ensure that we translate this significant market into opportunities for young people so that they can have confidence in our continent. The Secretariat, which I, as your humble servant, have the honor to lead, remains committed to supporting you, to supporting the private sector, to ensuring that we reach our objective of an integrated economy. So we are called today to reflect on our challenges as a continent. The lack of movement of persons is a very significant challenge. Visa restrictions amongst one another. The fact that an American or European passport is much easier to travel with across the continent than an African passport. This is a challenge for our heads of states. We must solve this issue of restrictions on movement of persons across the continent. The irony is that the colonialists left us with these visa rules, and yet we are sustaining them. So we've got to dismantle the colonial economic model, not only in an economic sense, but also in an ideological sense, where we see our continent and we see movement of persons as an advantage rather than a disadvantage. And so I close where I began, and that is by observing what is obvious to all of us: the current global environment. A multiplicity of unlawful wars, rising protectionism, as I said, attempts to weaken the multilateral trading system, all of these challenges that are external to Africa, indeed, will test our resolve. And we should be no doubt that because of these externalities, these global challenges, the historic task that all of us have of moving closer to economic integration in Africa will be even more difficult, if not almost impossible. It will be even more difficult given the current global environment. But it is an essential historic duty for us to discharge as Africans. As I mentioned, this crisis is an opportunity. And so these externalities must compel us as Africans to reflect on how we can navigate this crisis in a manner that creates opportunities for all of us. And I believe of all the tools that are available to us through the African Union, our heads of states, all of the tools that are available to us, intra-Africa trade through the AFCFTA, is one tool that will enable us to reach this economic integration that all of us desire. In his seminal work, Professor Adedeji, the erstwhile Executive Secretary of the United Nations Commission on Africa, who pioneered the African Alternative Framework to structural adjustment programs, which of course were imposed on us, as you recall, he wisely counseled, and I quote, "Africa has to break the apron strings of structural and relational dependence on producing a limited number of cheap primary commodities for export," end quote. Africa has to break the apron strings. And I believe that for us to break these apron strings, we must accelerate the building, the construction of a viable domestic market for industrialization of our continent. I want to thank all of you very much for your attention, and I wish us a very happy Africa Day. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Indeed, before I give a small reflection, I do like to apologize that I didn't recognize the presence of the Executive Director of the Ministry of International Relations and Trade, Madam Nita Nipondoka Rubiati. My apologies for that. I also like to recognize the presence of the former Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Dr. THEO, who has also joined us. And all deputy ministers and senior government officials that have joined us, please feel welcome. We do apologize that we recognized you earlier. Indeed, if I could sum up the brief presentation that we have received, or the keynote lecture, indeed it's thought-provoking. So many issues that came out, talking about currency conversion issues, travel restrictions, challenges for small SMEs that want to penetrate the market, dismantling of the economic setup that came as a result of colonial setup. But one thing which is important, which he pointed out, that I think that most of us always take for granted, that is reforming the political setup in any African country. That is where it starts. People always talk about that economics is first, but truthfully, politics is about deciding who gets what, when, and how. If you can make that of commitment first there, I think everything else really, really changes. And that is also what I picked up from your presentation, and also the fact that no one owes us development. It must come here from the continent. So if we don't do our part, then definitely we will have challenges. I am pleased to say that in terms of the structural adjustment programs that you referred to, which we can all collectively agree that indeed pose restrictions on Namibia, that our founding president then said no. If he would have said yes, it means the size of our economy, the size of the state-owned enterprises would have been hardly affected. And we know that state-owned enterprises in Namibia, in terms, for instance, a couple of years ago, the value of pension contribution with sustained investment in Namibia, for instance, has been above over 30 billion. So definitely, we might not be there, but we're definitely moving towards that discussion. But however, thank you very much for those contributions. I do apologize that we did not have the music interlude, but I think this discussion is too rich, it's too important, and we have limited time available. So I want to open up the floor. I do apologize that we seem to be having some challenges with power connectivity, and I do hope that our host is busy attending to that as well. We do apologize for that. In terms of the questions, I want to ask that please be brief, and if we can allow one question per person at a time, and if you can be very direct with your question, who you are posing it to, is it to the minister or is it the Secretary General? Please be very specific, and if I can ask one question per person to allow as many people as possible. It is now 7:34, and we should be done by 8 o'clock. So I think first round, we'll have a set of 3 questions. I see there is a floating mic at the back. Can I ask the gentleman in black? So can I have the first show of hands? I have Dr. THEO has his hand up. I have Madam here, and I have the second Madam here. So those are the first 3 questions that we have. Please be brief, direct, so that we can also have an opportunity to get responses.
Thank you. Mine is not a question because I came in a bit late and only had the last part. It's more of a comment to support what the SG was talking about, the need to have industrial-based economies on the continent for us to integrate now the continental economy. It is true, when you look, for example, in the SADC region, you probably have only about 2 countries or so whose economies are industry based. When you look countries in Western Africa, so many of them produces, for example, cacao beans. Yet we go and buy chocolates from Europe always. I would indeed support that we should concentrate on industrialization of our economies on the continent as we move towards the continent becoming a free trade area. I so submit.
Thank you. Can I have the microphone here? Just the second row here in front, second row. Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Nipudilo Yashindi, a student for International Relations, Diplomacy and Management. I have 2 questions, very brief. I don't know if I should ask all of them now or you give me another chance.
One at a time. Hopefully
Okay, the first one, okay, maybe I must just direct all my questions to His Excellency. The first question is, maybe first I should commend the progress made so far by AFC FTA. And the question I have, the first one is, can Africa achieve true economic integration without first achieving industrial sovereignty? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now the second question, she's next to her. Yes.
Mine is not going to be brief, it's now. My name is Talita Klabanelo.
No, I think just hold the microphone closer to you.
Hello?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you for your insightful presentation. I could like to ask the following question. Your Excellency, intra-Africa trade is important, not only for expanding market access, but also to promote industrialization, economic diversification, and inclusive development within Africa economics such as Namibia. Sorry, toch.
It's fine, please.
Overall, how can Namibia address its existing economic constraints and developmental challenges in order to maximize intra-Africa investment and trade opportunities under the African Continental Free Trade Area? And what do you see as the potential benefits and risk for Namibia within this evolving economic continental trade framework? And I also want to know who is founding the African Continental Free Trade Area. I thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we have, since the other one was a contribution, can we have the gentleman here on the right for the third question?
Thank you, Master of Ceremony, Your Excellency. I'd like to know on that $1.5 trillion digital economy by, I think, 2030, where are we now? What are the gaps on interoperability and bank settlements among our respective central banks?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was the first round of questions, Your Excellency. The podium is yours. Okay, again, I think there's a mic. Yes, please. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for the questions and the comments. Let me start with the last question. As we speak today, the payments infrastructure on our continent is, it is not suitable to supporting a viable integrated market. If you make a payment, you are in Ghana, your counterparty is in Kenya. You make a payment using any other method apart from SWIFT, apart from PABS, I'm sorry, your money starts in London or New York, and then it goes to Kenya. With the Pan-African payment and settlement system, we are eliminating that. If you go from Ghana to Kenya, there's a direct flight. There is no reason why money should not move directly. So we have to build a payments infrastructure for the continent that will enable interoperability of payment systems. The East African community, West Africa. So we need a payments infrastructure that each bank or central bank or commercial bank can switch onto that payments infrastructure to access a payment system in another part of the continent. So somebody has got to invest in building the technology, which Afreximbank has, invest in making liquidity available for the settlements, for the payments, which they have. And here when we took PABS to the Assembly of Heads of States to be endorsed, we were not saying that any other payment system is not acceptable. We are simply saying, we as Africans, in order for us to have payment sovereignty, we must control our own payment systems. And that's exactly what has happened. Today, there are 21 central banks that have switched onto PABS. There are 148 commercial banks that have also switched onto PABS. There are, depending on the region of the continent, some are moving much faster to adopt and move towards PABS. Others are a bit slower. But really for us, the essential part of achieving payment sovereignty is being able to control your own payment system and your own payments infrastructure. Any player in the market that is available, that has the liquidity and the capital available to invest in the payments infrastructure, we support that. The protocol on digital trade is clear. We are technology neutral, we are partner neutral. What we support is the reduction of the cost of payments in Africa. Any partner that can deliver that ambition is certainly our partner, and that is what has happened with Afreximbank. We must reduce this reliance on third currencies for trade. It also leads to other political problems. You say something that upsets somebody in Washington or in London, you are kicked off a payment system. You can't transact. So where is our sovereignty in that? In terms of industrial development, what we have to, and this is our task with the ministers of trade, what we have to avoid is delivering economic integration only de jure or only at law. We must make sure that as much as the AfCFTA has been negotiated by lawyers and adopted, and we have achieved at law, we have achieved the integration, but where it will matter the most is the interconnectedness, for example, of our regional value chains. We have a hydrogen in Namibia. How do we connect Namibia to other markets for exploration and investing in hydrogen. We have next door, Namibia, I mentioned. How do we create an interconnectivity in, next to Namibia rather, is Botswana? How do we create an integrated agricultural sector so that we complement on each other's competitive advantages? One of the issues that I consistently raise with South Africa is you must make sure that as we implement integration, that there are shared benefits. You can't have a situation where there is a concentration of industrial development in one country. That is going to, it will lead to the integration model that we are pursuing to be rejected, and correctly so. So we've got to take concrete steps to make sure that our industrial development is shared. If next door South Africa is assembling vehicles, what components can be manufactured in Namibia? Lithium batteries, for example. Let's map out the type of integration that we want to see and the model of integration that we want to see, and it must be of shared benefits across countries and in country. Otherwise, the integration we want to see is not going to succeed. I believe that industrial development must be the anchor of our integration because we need to build the supply chain capabilities, for example. So we have to be able to do both as a continent. We have to be able to accelerate and advance the legal implementation of the agreement. At the same time, we must be able to establish supply chains and centers of excellence across the continent. And I will give you another example. In 2022, the very first vaccine manufacturing plant opened in Rwanda. And it is connected to Senegal, and also to Ghana in terms of the supply chain and the manufacturing. So this is exactly the kind of integrated industrial development that we should strive for. I mentioned also the issue of beef imports into West Africa from other parts of the world. We have the capability to establish a continental supply chain so that these goods are able to move freely. Of course, there's the issue of financing and capital that is required to invest in that. So I'm saying that our industrial development must move at the same time. Thank you. It must move at the same time as we implement the agreement. I think those were the questions.
Thank you.